Every morning, as the dawn breaks over the red brick rooftops of Rockford, Illinois, Malcolm Hayes is already at Franklin Grove High School. At 50 years old, he is a familiar yet quiet presence, pushing a cleaning cart down the 200-foot hallway, where faded science posters and basketball team banners hang limply. His gray uniform, with the clumsily stitched name M. Hayes on the chest, blends into the school environment like part of the wall. No one pays attention to Malcolm, and no one wonders where he came from. He's the one who keeps the floors shining, the lights working, and that's enough. Rockford, about 90 miles northwest of Chicago, was once a bustling industrial hub filled with steel mills and auto assembly lines. But now, in 2025, the city bears the weary look of a place trying to forget its glorious past. Franklin Grove School is no different, with 1,200 students hailing from diverse neighborhoods, some living in cramped apartments, others in the suburbs with neatly trimmed lawns. Here, students face all sorts of pressures, grades, family expectations, and even the invisible biases tied to their skin color or circumstances. Malcolm sees it all, but he never speaks up. He just quietly goes about his work, pushing his cart through laughter, whispers, and the hurried wiping away of tears. It was a Tuesday morning, and the temperature outside was only about 45 degrees Fahrenheit, just enough for breaths to form thin wisps of fog in the air. Malcolm arrived at school at 5 a.m., as he did every day, unlocking the back gate and checking the second-floor restroom before the school bell rang. In the staff lounge, he brewed a cup of black coffee, no sugar, and sat gazing out the window. The city was still yawning, but inside him something stirred gently. Perhaps it was a memory, or maybe just a fleeting feeling. Malcolm didn't like to dwell on the past. It felt like a book he had closed long ago, yet sometimes the pages still turned on their own. The school hallway buzzed with energy as students poured in at 7:30. Malcolm stood tucked beside the locker, gripping a mop, watching the stream of young faces pass by. Jaden Carter, a senior with oversized headphones, walked by mumbling something about the math test. Maya Ruiz, an 11th grader with her hair pulled up high, was arguing with a friend about a formula she didn't understand. "Math is a nightmare," Maya sighed, tossing a book into her backpack. Malcolm heard her, and the corner of his mouth twitched slightly, but he didn't say a word. He never said anything. But that day, something felt different. As Malcolm pushed his cart past classroom 204, where Mr. Thornton's math class was about to start, he accidentally came to a stop. Through the glass window, he saw the whiteboard filled with formulas, curves of functions, and integrals. Mr. Thornton, the math teacher with salt and pepper hair and a voice sharp as a knife, was writing something, a half smile playing on his lips as if he were joking but also serious. Malcolm stood there for just a few seconds, but it was long enough for an old memory to flood back. Those long nights in the University of Illinois dorm, where he used to sit under the desk lamp, solving complex problems like unraveling the mysteries of the universe. He shook his head as if to brush away that image, and continued pushing his cart along. No one knows that Malcolm was once a math whiz who earned a full scholarship to study engineering at Urbana-Champaign. No one knows he once dreamed of designing bridges or teaching young minds. Now, he's just a janitor, the guy students call Mr. Hayes if they happen to bump into him. But as he bends down to pick up a crumpled piece of paper that had fallen on the floor, a math assignment with someone's messy handwriting, he gently smooths it out. The formula on the paper is wrong, he thinks, and for a moment his fingers glide over the numbers as if they're whispering to him. The bell rang, pulling Malcolm back to reality. He stuffed the piece of paper into his pocket and pushed the cart forward. The hallway was bustling again, but inside him a small spark had just flickered to life, a feeling he hadn't allowed himself to experience in a long time. Perhaps somewhere among the numbers and those young faces, there was still a part of Malcolm Hayes that he thought he had lost forever. On Tuesday morning, at Franklin Grove High School in Rockford, Illinois, the day unfolded with its familiar rhythm, the bell ringing, sneakers squeaking on the vinyl floor, and the faint scent of chalk lingering in the air. Classroom 204, where Mr. Thornton's advanced math class took place, was thick with tension. The temperature in the room hovered around 68 degrees Fahrenheit, but it felt heavier, perhaps due to the complex integral formulas sprawling across the whiteboard. Mr. Thornton, dressed in a light blue shirt and a loosely knotted tie, stood at the front of the class, a marker in hand, wearing a half smile that was both playful and serious. At 55, he He was known for his sharp tongue and his ability to make students both respect and fear him. "Who wants to give this problem a shot?" he asked, tapping the marker against the board, where a long, winding equation awaited. The whole class was silent. Jaden Carter, sitting in the front row, had his head down, pretending to review his notebook. Maya Ruiz, in the third row, bit her lip, flipping through her textbook as if searching for a lifeline. The other students stared out the window or discreetly checked their phones under the desk. Mr. Thornton sighed, his smile becoming more pronounced. "No one?" "How disappointing," he said, his voice drawn out as if he were performing. Then, as if by some twist of fate, he heard the sound of wheels rolling down the hallway, the familiar noise of the janitor's cart. Through the window, he saw Malcolm Hayes, the custodian, slowly pushing the cart, a mop tucked under his arm. Malcolm's salt and pepper hair hung low, as if he didn't want anyone to notice him. Thornton paused, his eyes lighting up as if he had just found a new toy. "Wait a second," he said, turning to the class with a mischievous grin. "Maybe we should invite an expert." He opened the door and called out loudly, "Hey, Mr. Hayes, come in here for a minute." The whole class erupted in quiet giggles, not loud enough to be disruptive, but enough to create an awkward atmosphere. Malcolm stopped, looked up, his deep brown eyes peering through the doorway. He was wearing a clean but worn grey uniform with M. Hayes stitched on the chest. "I'm working, sir," he replied, his voice deep and polite, but Thornton wouldn't let it go. "Oh, it'll just take a minute? Help these kids out with this problem, buddy? Or are you just good at mopping floors?" He tapped his pen on the board as if launching a challenge on a game show. Laughter erupted again, this time louder. Jaden glanced at Maya and whispered, "Is he serious?" Maya shrugged, but her eyes were glued to Malcolm, curious. Malcolm stood still, gripping the mop as if deep in thought. The whole class waited, some thinking he would walk away, others hoping for a funny exchange. But then, Malcolm did the unexpected. He propped the mop against the wall, stepped into the classroom, his rubber boots squeaking on the floor. "Can I borrow a pen?" he asked Thornton, his voice calm as if he were just asking for a roll of toilet paper. Thornton, a bit surprised, raised an eyebrow and handed over the marker. "Go ahead," he said, crossing his arms, a smile still lingering on his lips. Malcolm stepped up to the board, standing 6 feet tall, moving slowly but with confidence. He stared at the problema nested integral involving the chain rule and complex functions, and paused, not because it was difficult, but as if he were reading an old letter. The whole class fell silent, with only the buzzing of the ceiling fan breaking the stillness. Maya discreetly pulled out her phone, pretending to adjust her earbuds, but actually recording a video. Malcolm picked up his pen and began to write. His handwriting was clear and steady, showing no signs of rush. "This problem needs to separate the inner function first," he said, his voice deep as if he were speaking to himself. "The chain rule applies here, but you have to be careful with the limits." He drew a curve, then continued writing, each step unfolding on the board like a complete picture. The students started sitting up straighter. Jaden whispered to his friend, "What's going on here?" Thornton still had his arms crossed, but the smile on his face gradually faded, replaced by a look of tension. In less than 3 minutes, Malcolm finished. He set down his pen, turned to look at Thornton and then at the class. "I'm done," he said simply, as if he had just wiped away a smudge. The whiteboard was now a masterpiece of clear, logical steps, with not a single mistake. Maya's jaw dropped, her phone still recording. Jaden blurted out, "No way!" Thornton stepped up to the board, his eyes quickly scanning each line. He opened his mouth, but no words came out. The initial laughter had vanished, replaced by a stunned silence. Malcolm gave a slight nod to Thornton, as if nothing was amiss, then stepped out the door, lifting the mop. "I've got to keep going," he said, and disappeared down the hallway. The whole class remained silent, as if they had just witnessed something unbelievable. Thornton stared at the board, gripping his pen tightly, not out of anger, but because he knew everything had just changed. After the surprising moment in Mr. Thornton's math class, Franklin Grove High School seemed to carry on like any other day. The bell rang between classes, students jostled in the 200-foot-long hallway, and the smell of toasted bread wafted through the air from the cafeteria. But for Malcolm Hayes, everything felt different now. As he pushed the cleaning cart down the row of lockers, the squeaky wheels reminded him of the problem on the whiteboard, one he had solved effortlessly as if time had never passed. He didn't want to dwell on it, but the memory crept in, like sunlight filtering through the curtains. That afternoon, as the sunset bathed the streets of Rockford, Illinois, in golden hues, Malcolm returned to his small apartment, about 2 miles from campus. The temperature outside had dropped to 40 degrees Fahrenheit, just chilly enough for him to zip up his jacket as he climbed the old wooden stairs. His apartment was on the third floor, only 600 square feet, furnished with a worn-out armchair, a tiny kitchen table, and a bookshelf crammed with old technical books. He kicked off his rubber boots and neatly placed them by the door before brewing a hot cup of tea. Steam rose from the ceramic mug, carrying the gentle scent of mint. Malcolm sat down, gazing out the window where the streetlights began to flicker on along the road. He didn't mean to do it, didn't intend to let his mind drift back to the past, but his hands instinctively reached for a wooden box under the bed. It was old, its corners worn smooth, as if it had gone untouched for decades. Malcolm lifted the lid, and immediately the scent of aged paper rushed out, like a greeting from a long-lost friend. Inside were mementos he rarely revisited: a math medal from the state tournament in 1990, a photo of him and his dad on his first day at the University of Illinois, Urbana-Champaign, and a crumpled letter from the admissions office congratulating him on receiving a full scholarship. He picked up the photo, his fingers brushing over his dad's smile. A mechanic with rough hands who always said, "Son, you're going to do great things." Malcolm closed his eyes, and memories flooded back like an old film. He had once been a star at Gary High School in Indiana, over 100 miles from Rockford. There, he not only led the math team, but also took first place at the state science fair with a homemade engine model. Teachers called him the Golden Brain, and when the letter from Urbana-Champaign arrived, the whole family celebrated with his mom's cookies and laughter echoing through their small home. In his freshman year of college, Malcolm felt right at home, solving complex problems under the dorm lights, dreaming of the day he would design bridges connecting cities. But then, one cold March morning, everything came crashing down. His father, always as strong as an oak, had a stroke right in the garage. When Malcolm got the call, he was at the library, buried in a pile of calculus books. He rushed home, but only managed to hold his father's hand one last time before he passed away. His mother, already worn down from working too hard at the factory, completely fell apart. Malcolm took a semester off from school, then another, to take care of his mother and little brother Tommy. He took on all sorts of heavy lifting jobs at the warehouse and delivered pizzas at night to keep the family from falling apart. College slowly became a distant dream, and when his mother passed away 2 years later, Malcolm knew he would never go back. He set the photo down and took a sip of tea, but it had gone cold. The apartment was quiet, with only the ticking of the clock on the wall breaking the silence. Malcolm looked at the box, where an old notebook lay, filled with the math formulas he had once written. He wondered if he had been wrong to let everything slip away. Was it too late to reclaim a part of himself? Today, in class, he had felt a spark, not from the lesson, but from the way Jaden and Maya looked at him, as if he were more than just the janitor. But then he shook his head, closed the box, and pushed it back into place. "Don't dream, Malcolm," he told himself, his voice low, almost a whisper to the darkness. He got up, turned off the light, but as he lay in bed, memories of the whiteboard and the marker strokes still haunted him. It might have been just a moment, but it awakened something in him. A question without an answer. The next day, Franklin Grove High School in Rockford, Illinois, seemed to wake up from a long slumber. The 200-foot hallway, usually echoing with the sound of sneakers and scattered chatter, was now buzzing with energy. Students huddled together, eyes glued to their phones, whispering about something. The early morning temperature was still a bit chilly, around 48 degrees Fahrenheit, but the atmosphere inside the school was hotter than ever. The center of every conversation wasn't a basketball game or some teenage drama, but Malcolm Hayes, the janitor who had just turned Mr. Thornton's math class into an unforgettable moment. Malcolm, like every day, pushed the cleaning cart across the second floor, his rubber shoes squeaking on the vinyl floor. His gray uniform was still clean, but today his gaze was lower, as if he wanted to avoid curious looks. He didn't know that Maya Ruiz, an 11th grade student with her hair tied up high, had posted a video of him solving a math problem on TikTok right after class yesterday. The angle was a bit shaky but clear. Malcolm's hand moved across the whiteboard, his calm voice explaining the chain rule, and Mr. Thornton's stunned face in the background. Maya's caption was simple: "Our school janitor just left the whole math class speechless." In just one night, the video had over 5,000 views, and the number was still climbing. In the cafeteria, amidst the smell of fries and the clattering of forks and knives, Jaden Carter, a senior with oversized headphones, was replaying a video. "Did you see that?" he said to Elijah, a sophomore sitting across from him. "Mr. Hayes explains that problem like he just finished breakfast and decided to do math for fun." Elijah, shy and always intimidated by math, stared at the screen with wide eyes. "Why doesn't he just become a teacher full-time?" he asked. Jaden shrugged, but his eyes sparkled with admiration. It wasn't just them. The whole school seemed to be looking at Malcolm through a new lens. Students who used to walk past him without a word now stopped, calling him Mr. Hayes with a mix of awkwardness and sincerity. In the middle of third period, while Malcolm was changing a light bulb in the chemistry lab, a group of students appeared at the door. Jaden led the way, followed by Maya, Elijah, and Sophia, an 11th grader with a math notebook clutched tightly under her arm. "Mr. Hayes," Jaden spoke up, his voice a bit hesitant, "can we ask you something?" Malcolm paused, the new light bulb still in his hand. He looked at them, four eager yet anxious young faces. "What's up?" he asked, his tone as deep as usual. "It's about math," Sophia said, opening her notebook to a page filled with formulas. "We didn't understand the integral from yesterday. You explain it better than Mr. Thornton." Malcolm frowned, not out of annoyance, but surprise. He glanced at the problem, the unfamiliar symbols like old, forgotten notes. "I'm not a teacher," he said, setting the lamp down. But Maya jumped in. "Just this once, Mr. Hayes, please." Her voice was so persuasive, as if the whole world depended on his answer. Malcolm sighed as he looked at the wall clock. There were 20 minutes left before he had to check the third-floor restroom. "All right," he said, pointing to a corner of the nearby library. "But just this once." The four students cheered, eagerly following him down the hallway. In the library corner under the fluorescent lights, Malcolm sat down with them, pencil in hand, and explained the math problem step by step. "Think of it like a puzzle," he said, drawing a curve on the scratch paper. "Break it down into parts, then put it back together." Elijah, who usually trembled when talking about math, began to nod, his eyes lighting up as he started to understand. The lesson stretched longer than expected until the lunch bell rang. As the students stood up, Sophia clutched her notebook and said, "Thank you, Mr. Hayes. I've never found math this easy." Malcolm just nodded, but as they left, he felt a strange warmth in his heart. Something he hadn't felt in a long time. But that joy didn't last. When he returned to his car to clean up, another teacher, Ms. Lin from the physics class, walked by and asked, "I heard you had the whole school buzzing yesterday, Malcolm. Is that true?" He gave a faint smile and replied it was just one math problem. But her curious gaze made him uncomfortable. By evening, in his small apartment, Malcolm sat in an armchair, a cold cup of peppermint tea resting on the table. He flipped through a local newspaper, trying not to think about the day he had, but his mind kept drifting back to the library, to the eager faces of Jaden, Maya, Elijah, and Sophia. Then he remembered the video Maya had shown off as they left the library, claiming it was going viral. Malcolm didn't have a smartphone, just an old flip phone, so he had no idea how far the video had spread, but the thought of the whole school, and maybe even more, talking about him made him uneasy. He didn't want to be famous. He didn't want to be scrutinized. Malcolm stood up, walked to the window, and looked down at the empty street 30 feet below. He had spent over a decade living invisibly, working quietly, staying out of the spotlight. Solving yesterday's puzzle was just a moment of impulse, a fleeting second when he let the past rise up. But now, it felt like a stone thrown into a pond, creating ripples he couldn't control. He wondered if he had the strength to face this attention, or the person he once was. He closed the curtains, but in the darkness, one question lingered. Could he keep avoiding the light forever? A few days after the event where Malcolm Hayes solved the integral at Franklin Grove High School in Rockford, Illinois, the atmosphere in the school was still electric. The long 200-foot hallway echoed not just with the sounds of students, but also buzzed with stories about Mr. Hayes, the janitor who had suddenly become a legend. Outside, the temperature hovered around 50 degrees Fahrenheit, but inside the teacher's lounge, the atmosphere was heavier, especially around the table where Mr. Thornton usually sat. At 55, with salt and pepper hair and steel-framed glasses, Thornton had always taken pride in his position as a respected math teacher, though not necessarily beloved. But now, the name Malcolm Hayes felt like a thorn in his side. On Thursday morning, Thornton walked into the teacher's lounge, holding a steaming cup of black coffee. Miss Lynn, the physics teacher, was animatedly recounting how Malcolm had taught a group of students in the library the day before. "I'm telling you, he explained the chain rule better than the textbook," she said, her voice brimming with excitement. Another teacher, Mr. Crane from the literature class, nodded in agreement. Jaden Carter told him it was the first time he really understood integrals. Jaden, that kid who never wants to study? Thornton sat down, his lips pressed tightly together, pretending to read a stack of tests. But his hand gripped the pen so tightly it seemed like he might snap it in half. "He's not a teacher," Thornton said, his voice icy, his eyes fixed on the pile of papers. "Let's not make a big deal out of this." The whole room fell silent for a moment. Miss Lynn raised an eyebrow but didn't respond. Thornton didn't say anything more, but everyone could feel the tension in the air. He had once been the star of the math class, the kind of teacher who inspired both fear and respect with his sharp lectures. But now, students were starting to compare him to Malcolm, a janitor with no degree, no office, just a mop and a mind that no one expected. That morning in class, as Thornton wrote a new problem on the whiteboard, Maya Ruiz raised a hand and asked, "How would Mr. Hayes solve this?" The class chuckled softly, not maliciously, but Thornton felt like he had been doused with cold water. He snapped back, "Just do it the way I taught you," and turned away, his back stiff. But Thornton wasn't a petty man, he was just lost. That night, in the house 3 miles from the school, he sat in the living room, the light from the desk lamp illuminating the stack of tests he was grading. His wife Ellen noticed the furrowed brow on her husband's face. "What's bothering you now, Jim?" she asked. Thornton sighed. "It's just, I don't like being made a fool of in my own class." Ellen shook her head. "No one is laughing at you. They were just surprised by Malcolm. You were too, weren't you?" Thornton didn't answer, but her question kept him tossing and turning all night. He recalled the look in Malcolm's eyes as he approached the board, humble, unassuming, simply, "Right." The next morning, Thornton did something he had never imagined. During lunch break, instead of sitting in the teacher's lounge, he walked past the library where Malcolm was guiding a familiar group of students: Jaden, Maya, Elijah, and Sophia. He stood at the door, about 15 feet away, far enough not to be noticed. Malcolm sat among them, not standing in front of the board like a teacher, but right on the floor, surrounded by crumpled papers and pencils. He pointed to an equation, his voice deep and patient. "Don't rush, Elijah," he said, as the 10th grader fumbled. "Think of it like a story. If this function is the main character, what will it do next?" Elijah, who usually trembled when talking about math, burst out laughing and then wrote down the correct answer. Thornton stood there, motionless, feeling as if he had just seen something he had long forgotten. He didn't stay long, but long enough to realize something. Malcolm didn't teach to prove a point. He taught because the kids needed him. Thornton turned away, stepping out into the schoolyard, where Rockford's rare sunlight filtered through the tree branches. He thought about his early years of teaching, when he would sit with students after school, not for money or fame, but for the joy of seeing their eyes light up. Somewhere along the way, he had lost that. That afternoon, Thornton did something unusual. He walked into the library again, where Malcolm and the group of students were still there, now working on a new problem. He didn't say anything, just pulled out a chair and sat down a few feet away from them. Jaden looked up, surprised, but Malcolm just nodded slightly, as if it were the most normal thing in the world. "Mr. Thornton, what do you think about this approach?" Sophia asked, pointing to a step in their solution. Thornton cleared his throat, caught off guard by being invited into the conversation. "It's good," he said, then added, "but if you change this order, it'll be quicker." Malcolm looked at him, not with competition in his eyes, but with a small nod, as if they were just starting to understand each other. As the students left, Thornton stayed behind for a moment. "You did well, Hayes," he said, his voice a bit strained. Malcolm shrugged, organizing his notes. "Just helping the kids." Thornton nodded, then stepped out, feeling like he had just shed a part of his burden. Not everything was resolved, but for the first time he felt a sense of relief. A few weeks after the video of Malcolm Hayes solving the integral equation went viral, Franklin Grove High School in Rockford, Illinois, felt like it was caught in a small storm. The 200-foot hallway was no longer just a place for students to chat about tests or basketball games. It had become a stage for whispers about Malcolm, the janitor who had changed how everyone saw him. The outdoor temperature in early May was cool, around 55 degrees Fahrenheit, but inside Principal Clara Monroe's office, the atmosphere was heavy. On a desk lay a stack of printed emails, some with the subject line, "Concerns about school staff." Malcolm, who continued to push his cleaning cart through the hallways, was blissfully unaware of the brewing turmoil. Clara Monroe, a 48-year-old woman with neatly tied curly hair and sharp eyes, skimmed through the letters. One letter, titled "Concerned Parents," questioned, "Is it appropriate to have a janitor teach math to students? Is he trained? Has he passed a background check to work with children?" Another letter, anonymous, went even further. "We need qualified teachers, not a handyman claiming to be smart." Clara sighed and folded the stack of letters. She had known Malcolm since he started working at the school 6 years ago. He was always punctual, meticulous, and had never caused any trouble. But more than that, she had heard from Ms. Lynn about his impromptu lessons in the library, where he helped students like Elijah overcome their fear of math. Meanwhile, Malcolm continued working as usual. He replaced the toilet paper in the third-floor restroom, wiped away an ink stain on the whiteboard in room 204, and checked the drinking fountain in the courtyard 50 feet from the main entrance. But he began to sense something was off. A few teachers, like Mr. Crane from the literature class, now looked at him longer, their gazes mixed with curiosity and caution. Once, as he pushed his cart through the teacher's lounge, the chatter suddenly stopped, as if he had just walked into a secret. Malcolm didn't ask anything, he just lowered his head and carried on with his tasks. He was used to being invisible, but this time, the attention made him feel like he was walking on a tightrope. That afternoon, in the library, Malcolm was sitting with his usual group of students, Jaden Carter, Maya Ruiz, Elijah, and Sophia. They spread out their scratch paper on the table, discussing a new multivariable problem. The fluorescent lights illuminated their faces, filled with eagerness and focus. "Mr. Hayes, where did I go wrong?" Elijah asked, pushing the paper toward him. Malcolm glanced over it and then sketched a small diagram. "You forgot to divide by the derivative here," he said, his voice deep and patient. "Take it slow. Don't let the numbers confuse you." Elijah nodded, a bright smile spreading across his face as he fixed the mistake. But in the middle of the lesson, Malcolm felt a cold breeze sweep through. He glanced up and saw a social studies teacher, Miss Harper, standing at the library door, watching them with an inscrutable expression. She didn't say anything, just jotted something down in her notebook before leaving. Malcolm turned back to the students, but his heart felt heavy. He knew he hadn't done anything wrong, but that scrutiny felt like a warning. He was stepping out of his familiar role. After class, Clara called Malcolm into her office. He walked in, still wearing his grey uniform, his hands clean but rough from work. "Have a seat, Malcolm," Clara said, pointing to the chair across from her. He stood still, shaking his head slightly. "I'm fine, ma'am." Clara smiled, but her eyes were serious. "There are a few parents who have questions about your help with the kids' math," she said directly. "They don't doubt your abilities, but they want to know if you have the qualifications." Malcolm frowned, not out of anger, but because he had never thought he needed qualifications to help someone. "I'm just explaining a few math problems," he said. "I'm not teaching an official class." Clara nodded and opened a file. "I checked. You are accepted into the University of Illinois on a full scholarship. Not everyone can do that, Malcolm." He looked down, his fingers lightly gripping the edge of his shirt. "That was a long time ago," he replied. Clara leaned forward. "It doesn't matter. You're a staff member here with a full background check. What you're doing with the kids is right. I just want you to know that I support you." Malcolm nodded, but as he left the office, he felt an invisible weight pressing down on his shoulders. That night, in a small apartment 2 miles from the school, Malcolm sat in an armchair, a cold cup of peppermint tea resting on the table. He thought about the letters Clara had mentioned, about Mrs. Harper's gaze. He didn't want to cause any trouble, didn't want to upset anyone. But then, memories of today's class flooded back, the smile on Elijah's face, Sophia's determination, the way Jaden patted Maya on the back when she solved a tough problem. They didn't care who he was. They just needed him to help them understand. The next day, in the library, Malcolm decided to share something he rarely spoke about. When Jaden asked why he was so good at math, he paused and looked at the whole group. "I used to think I'd become an engineer," he said slowly. "But life doesn't always go as planned. Failure isn't the end. It's just a detour. You all will face those detours too. Don't let them define you." The group fell silent, not out of embarrassment, but because they felt the weight of his words. Sophia, usually quiet, spoke up. I don't care what others say, Mr. Hayes. You helping us is enough. Jaden nodded. Exactly. Let those who complain do their thing. Malcolm smiled, feeling a sense of relief for the first time that day. As they continued with the problem, he realized something. No matter how much the world doubted him, the faces in front of him were all the reason he needed to keep going. The late days of May in Rockford, Illinois, bring a gentle warmth and refreshing breezes that ease the 72-degree Fahrenheit heat of midday. At Franklin Grove High School, the 200-foot hallway buzzes with the sounds of students, but now the name Malcolm Hayes is more than just a passing story. His spontaneous study sessions in the library have become an essential part of a familiar group of students. Jaden Carter, Maya Ruiz, Elijah, and Sophia. They call it Mr. Hayes Hour, even though Malcolm just gives a faint smile whenever he hears that name. He still pushes the cleaning cart, changes light bulbs, and wipes down the whiteboards, but every Tuesday and Thursday afternoon, he sits among the math notebooks, rediscovering a piece of himself that he thought was lost. One afternoon, in the library under the fluorescent lights, Malcolm was guiding Elijah through a double integral problem. The 10th grader, who used to tremble at the mention of math, now sat up straight, his pencil moving confidently across the scratch paper. Mr. Hayes, I think I get it now, Elijah said, his eyes lighting up as he connected the steps. Malcolm nodded, a slight smile tugging at the corners of his mouth. Great job. Now, give the next problem a shot. Next to them, Sophia flipped through her textbook, whispering to Maya about a formula, while Jaden doodled a graph to check his answers. The atmosphere didn't feel like a classroom. It felt like a conversation, where Malcolm wasn't standing at the front, but sitting among them, like an older friend sharing the secrets of numbers. When Elijah finished the problem, he pushed the paper away and beamed with a bright smile. I did it, Mr. Hayes. If it weren't for you, I would have given up on this subject a long time ago. Malcolm looked at him, and for a moment he saw himself at 16, a boy in Gary, Indiana, captivated by math problems just like he was by adventure stories. Elijah's words struck a chord with him, not out of pride, but because they stirred up a feeling he had buried deep, the joy of helping someone see the light. He stood up, pretending to check the wall clock, but really to hide the slight moisture in his eyes. You all did great, he said, his voice deep as usual. Now, head home. Don't keep your mums worried. But that feeling didn't linger easily. When Malcolm returned to his small apartment just 2 miles from the school, the darkness of the 600-square-foot room pulled him back into old doubts. He sat in the armchair, a cup of cold peppermint tea sitting untouched on the table. He thought about the complaint letters that Principal Clara Monroe had mentioned, about the scrutinizing looks from a few teachers. He didn't want to cause trouble, he didn't want to step outside the safe zone he had built over the past decade. But then, the images of Elijah smiling, Sophia persevering, Jaden focused flashed back into his mind. They didn't need him to be a teacher. They just needed him to be himself. That weekend, Malcolm drove his old truck to a garage on the outskirts of Rockford, about 5 miles from home. It was where his younger brother Tommy worked. At 42, Tommy was a few inches shorter than Malcolm, but he had a contagious smile and hands stained with grease from working on cars all day. The two brothers didn't see each other often, not because of any distance, but because life had pulled them down different paths. In the garage, under the neon lights and the smell of motor oil, Tommy wiped his hands on a rag and looked at Malcolm with a playful glint in his eye. I heard you've become a big shot at school, Tommy said, winking. The janitor solving math problems like it's a Hollywood movie. Malcolm shrugged and sat on a toolbox. I'm just helping a few kids, but Tommy wasn't going to let him off that easily. Don't be modest. I know you, Mal. You used to dream of being an engineer, teaching, all those big things. Now you have a chance. Why back down? Malcolm looked down, his fingers tracing a scratch on the metal box. I'm not that person anymore, Tommy. Life has changed. Tommy stepped closer, his tone more serious. Life doesn't stop, brother. You don't need a degree to do the right thing. Those kids need you. Live in the moment. Tommy's words were like a stone thrown into the still waters of Malcolm's heart. On the way home, under the starry sky of Rockford, he thought about his days at the University of Illinois, when he would sit with classmates explaining problems late into the night. He remembered that feeling. Not the feeling of victory, but the feeling of belonging to something bigger. But then he also recalled the nights spent working in the warehouse, the bills piling up, the shattered dreams after the death of his parents. He wondered if he had the courage to try again. Next Monday, Malcolm would do something he had never thought of before. In the library, after the group of students had left, he suggested to Miss Lynn, who had stopped by to watch him teach, "If any teachers want to join in, I don't mind," he said, his voice a bit hesitant. Miss Lynn smiled. "I'll let everyone know." 2 days later, the library was busier than usual. Besides Jaden, Maya, Elijah, and Sophia, there were 3 new students, and Mr. Thornton, who had once been envious of Malcolm, sat in the corner quietly observing. Malcolm didn't stand at the board, he remained seated among the students, but this time he shared more. "Math isn't meant to scare you," he said, sketching a function on a piece of scrap paper. "It's a way to understand the world, find joy in it." The class lasted until sunset, the bright orange light streaming through the library windows. As everyone left, Thornton stayed behind, looking at Malcolm. "You should do this more often," he said, his tone no longer competitive. Malcolm simply nodded, but inside, a door had just cracked open. The next day, Clara Monroe called Malcolm into her office. "I have a proposal," she said, sliding a piece of paper toward him. "We want you to teach an official class after school, and you'll be paid for it. No degree required, just keep doing what you're doing now." Malcolm looked at the paper, his fingers tightening slightly. He felt honored but also scared. An official class meant responsibility, the spotlight he had always avoided. "Thank you," he said slowly, "but I'd like to keep things the way they are. I want the kids to come because they want to, not because of a schedule." Clara nodded, not pushing. "I understand. But this door is always open, Malcolm." As he left the office and stepped out into the courtyard where the sunlight filtered through the trees 30 feet away, he felt a sense of relief. He didn't need a title, didn't need an office. All he needed were the afternoons in the library, where the young faces reminded him that life still had things worth striving for. On a late June evening in Rockford, Illinois, the warm embrace of summer filled the air, with temperatures hovering around 78 degrees Fahrenheit and gentle breezes sweeping through the Franklin Grove High School campus. The annual student fair, the biggest event of the year, was buzzing with excitement in the sprawling 10,000 square foot gymnasium. Stage lights, illuminated colorful booths, a model of a volcano erupting, abstract paintings, and a choir's melodies drifting from a distant corner. The scents of popcorn and lemonade mingled, creating a lively atmosphere that everyone could feel. But this year, a small corner of the gym was drawing all eyes. A booth called Hayes Corner. Malcolm Hayes, a 50-year-old janitor now dressed in a dark blue shirt and casual jeans instead of his gray uniform, stood slightly back from the booth. He didn't want to be the center of attention, but the students wouldn't let him have a choice. The Hayes Corner booth, initiated by Jaden Carter, Maya Ruiz, Elijah, and Sophia, was a surprising tribute they had spent the entire week preparing. On the table were small signs, each telling a story of a student about how Malcolm helped them overcome their fear of math and regain their self-confidence. One sign, written in Elijah's messy handwriting, read, "Mr. Hayes made me see math as not an enemy. Thank you." Another, from Sophia, was more neatly written. "He taught me that failure is just the first step." Next to them were math problems solved on scrap paper, serving as proof of the countless hours spent learning in the library. Malcolm looked at the crowd gathered around the booth, his heart a mix of embarrassment and emotion. He had never wanted the spotlight, never thought he deserved the attention, but when Jaden, with his oversized headphones hanging around his neck, patted him on the shoulder and said, "Mr. Hayes, this is for you," he couldn't help but smile a little. Maya, standing next to a poster, was explaining to a group of parents how Malcolm turned complex formulas into easy-to-understand stories. "He doesn't just teach math," she said, her eyes shining. "He teaches us how not to give up." In the crowd, Clara Monroe, the principal, observed everything with a satisfied smile. She wore a green dress, her curly hair neatly tied back, and stood next to Ms. Lynn, the science teacher, who had witnessed Malcolm's first lessons. "I told you he had talent," Ms. Lynn whispered. Clara nodded. "It's not just talent, it's heart." But the most surprised person in the crowd was Mr. Thornton, the math teacher, who had once been envious of Malcolm. He stood at the edge of the booth, hands in his pockets, his eyes scanning each board. His face was no longer tense as before. Instead, it wore a contemplative expression, as if he were reflecting on himself. As the main program began, Clara stepped onto the stage holding the microphone. The applause erupted, drowning out the background music. "This year's festival is special," she said, her voice warm yet clear. "We're not just honoring the students, but also those who quietly make a difference." She paused, looking over at Malcolm, who was trying to shrink away behind the booth. "Malcolm, Hayes, could you come up here for a moment?" The crowd gasped, and a few students whistled. Malcolm shook his head. But Jaden and Sophia pushed him forward, beaming with smiles. He stepped up, his sneakers making a soft sound on the wooden floor, the stage lights shining down and making him blink. Clara handed the microphone to him, but Malcolm raised his hand to decline. "I'm not good at speaking in front of crowds," he said, his deep voice making the whole auditorium laugh. Then, unexpectedly, Thornton stepped up from behind. He was wearing a white shirt, no tie, looking more relaxed than usual. "Can I say a few words?" he asked Clara, and she nodded, handing over the microphone. Thornton cleared his throat, looking straight at Malcolm, then turning to the crowd. "I've been teaching math here for 20 years, he began. "I thought I knew everything about teaching, but Malcolm reminded me of the most important thing. It's not about who stands in front of the board, but who makes the students want to learn." The arena fell silent, then erupted into applause, powerful like crashing waves. Thornton looked at Malcolm, his gaze free of any trace of competition. "Thank you, Malcolm," he said, his voice sincere, "for teaching me that." Malcolm simply nodded, saying nothing, but his eyes sparkled with a hint of emotion. The crowd rose to their feet, clapping endlessly. Elijah shouted from the corner of the room, "Mr. Hayes is #1!" And the whole school burst into laughter, including Malcolm. Then, a reporter from the local newspaper Rockford Register-Star approached Malcolm, notebook in hand. "Mr. Hayes, can you share your journey from a janitor to an inspiration?" Malcolm looked at her, then glanced at the crowd of students, parents, and teachers. "I don't have any special journey," he said slowly. "I just help the kids see how great they really are. Sometimes all it takes is for someone to believe in you, and that's enough." The reporter jotted down notes quickly, but Malcolm wasn't concerned about the article. He just wanted to get back to the booth, where Maya was showing a math problem to a 9th grader. As the festival came to a close, the lights in the gymnasium dimmed, leaving behind colorful scraps of paper and echoes of laughter. Malcolm stood alone by Hayes' corner, gathering up the signs. Clara approached, placing her hand on his shoulder. "You did something amazing tonight," she said. Malcolm shrugged, but his smile was more genuine than ever. "It wasn't me," he replied, "it was the kids." He looked around, seeing Jaden and Sophia stacking chairs, while Elijah helped Maya carry the signs back to the library. They weren't just students. They were the reason he woke up every morning. After the vibrant student festival at Franklin Grove High School in Rockford, Illinois, life seemed to return to its usual rhythm. The early days of July brought a pleasant warmth, around 80 degrees Fahrenheit, with sunlight streaming through the tall trees about 30 feet away from the schoolyard. The long 200-foot hallway still echoed with the sounds of sneakers and the laughter of students, but now, Malcolm Hayes was no longer just a nameless figure. He continued to push his cleaning cart, change light bulbs, and wipe down the whiteboards. But each step he took carried a gentle confidence, not because of fame, but because he had found a purpose. Malcolm continued his volunteer tutoring sessions in the library on Tuesdays and Thursdays after school. That little corner under the fluorescent lights was now always filled with laughter, the sound of pencils gliding across scratch paper, and the curious questions of students. Jaden Carter, Mayra Ruiz, Elijah, and Sophia remained the core group, but now there were a few new faces. Underclassmen who had heard about Mr. Hayes and wanted to give it a shot. Malcolm never stood at the board like a formal teacher. He sat among them, on the floor or a wooden chair, explaining math as if he were telling a story. "Think of a function like a road," he said one afternoon, drawing a curve for a 9th grader. "It might twist and turn, but if you take it slow, you'll find your way." One evening, after finishing up on the 3rd floor, Malcolm returned to his small apartment 2 miles from the school. The 600-square-foot room was still as simple as ever, with a worn-out armchair, a small kitchen table, and a bookshelf filled with old technical books. He brewed a cup of peppermint tea, the steam rising with a gentle aroma. But tonight, he did something unusual. He pulled out an old wooden box from under the bed, a box that held his math medals, a photo with his dad, and a letter from the University of Illinois. This time, he didn't just look, he took everything out, placing them on the kitchen table under the warm yellow light. The shiny medal, though slightly tarnished after more than 30 years. The photo of him and his father at the school enrollment still bright, his father's smile reminding him of the days he dreamed of becoming an engineer. The crumpled letter with the scholarship congratulations no longer saddens him. He gently touches each item, not out of regret, but to make peace with the past. Then he pulls out something new, a stack of thank you letters from students, carefully folded after the celebration. One letter from Elijah reads, "Mr. Hayes, thanks to you, I'm no longer afraid of math. I'll do my best to make you proud." Maya's letter is brief. "You're the best teacher, even if you don't want to hear it." Malcolm smiled as he arranged the letters into a box, placing it next to the medals and photos. He closed the lid, but this time he didn't shove the box under the bed. Instead, he set it on the bookshelf, right next to his favorite math book. It was no longer a secret to hide. It was a part of him, just like the afternoons spent in the library were a part of his present. A few days later, while Malcolm was checking the water fountain at the schoolyard, a message popped up on his old flip phone. It was Jaden, who rarely texted, just sending a single line. "Mr. Hayes, I passed the state math exam. Thank you." Malcolm stood there, under the sunlight filtering through the tree branches, feeling a warm wave spread through him. He didn't reply. He had never been good at texting, but as he returned to his work, his steps felt lighter. That evening, Malcolm sat on the steps outside his apartment, gazing down the empty street 30 feet away. The sky over Rockford was filled with stars, and the sound of insects buzzed in harmony with the distant hum of cars. He took a sip of tea from the porcelain cup in his hand. He thought about Clara Monroe, who had once suggested he teach a formal class, about Mr. Thornton, who had unexpectedly become a friend, about the students who had changed the way he viewed life. He didn't need a title, an office, or a nameplate. His legacy wasn't in tangible things. It was in the spark of Elijah's eyes, in Sophia's determination, in Jaden's smile as he pushed past his own limits. Malcolm stood up, walked into the house, and turned off the lights. As he lay in bed, he no longer heard the ticking of the clock as a reminder of lost time. Instead, he heard the laughter of students, the sound of pencils gliding across paper, and the steady, peaceful rhythm of his own heartbeat. He knew that tomorrow, as he pushed the cleaning cart down the halls of Franklin Grove, he would once again be Malcolm Hayes, the janitor. But he was also a teacher without a title, and that was all he needed. A year later, the July sun shone brightly over the Franklin Grove High School campus in Rockford, Illinois, bringing with it a pleasant warmth of around 82 degrees Fahrenheit. The long 200-foot hallway was now adorned with a small sign, Hayes Corner Club, where math becomes fun. From a booth at the student fair, Hayes Corner had blossomed into an official math club, run by students and inspired by Malcolm Hayes. Every Tuesday and Thursday, the library buzzed with laughter and the sound of pencils gliding across scratch paper, as Jaden Carter, now a college freshman, occasionally dropped by to mentor the younger students. Malcolm, still in his grey uniform with Mem Hayes embroidered on the chest, pushed the cleaning cart down the hallway like he did every day. At 51 years old, his hair was a bit more salt and pepper, but his smile came more easily now. He still changed light bulbs, wiped down the whiteboards, and checked the water fountain 50 feet from the school entrance. But now, the students didn't just pass by him without a second thought. They stopped and greeted him with a friendly "Mr. Hayes." A ninth-grade girl, clutching a math book, ran up to him and asked, "Can you show me how to solve this problem?" Malcolm smiled and pointed toward the library. "Give me 10 minutes, and I'll be done with my work." In the library, under the fluorescent lights, Malcolm sat with a few new students, not to teach, but to chat. "Math is like life," he said, drawing a simple curve. "Sometimes you get lost, but just keep going and you'll find your way." They listened, not just for the answers, but because they believed in him. In the hallway, Maya Ruiz, now the club president, was hanging up posters for the next meeting. Elijah and Sophia, gearing up for 11th grade, were helping her tape them up. Malcolm stood up and looked around. He saw Jaden texting that he just got an A in his calculus class at college. He noticed the smile on the ninth grader's face when she finally understood the lesson. He knew he wasn't going to change the world, but for these people, he had made a difference. Malcolm stepped outside, the cleaning car rattling as it got ready for a new day and new stories. Thank you for joining Legendary Narratives on the journey of Malcolm Hayes, an ordinary janitor who touched the hearts of many with his kindness and hidden talent. This story reminds us that sometimes the biggest changes start from the smallest actions, and anyone can create their own legacy. If you feel inspired by Malcolm, please give us a like, subscribe to Legendary Narratives, and turn on the notification bell so you won't miss the next inspiring stories. We'd love to hear your thoughts, so share in the comments about a story that made you believe in yourself. Thank you for being here, and we'll see you in the next video. Keep spreading positivity, and like Malcolm, always be a light for someone.